Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson and Charlie Jewett. And today, Brooke, we're going to do some yoga. I'm drinking coffee, so it's hot yoga. So what do you have planned for us? This is called the Yoga of Conflict. How you do anything is how you do everything. Ooh, I like those sentences.
Yeah, so today I really want to delve into this idea that the things that we do are repetitive in our habits. You know, I had a yoga teacher a number of years ago, loved her. She was a great yoga teacher. And when we would be doing our movement on the mats, this was one of the phrases that she had. And I really grabbed a hold of it because it made sense. It started to show up how even the movement that we were doing in yoga, our willingness to move into sensation, our willingness to stretch ourselves, our lack of energy, our lack of willingness to do some of these things were repetitive in what was happening in our daily lives. And as I looked at that, I found it to be quite true. And then for this particular episode, I started bringing some of the other concepts that I thought reflected that. And so, here we go. This idea of how you do anything is how you do everything is reflective of the fractal nature of consciousness, or the fractal nature of everything that we see. And that fractalness, that repetitiveness, that repetitive patterning that we see, we can look at a leaf and we can see the repetitive patterns in nature on just about anything that we see. And if we start to go into this idea of, really looking at these patterns, we can start to assess them and see how they continue through the different aspects of our behaviors.
Yeah. So I'm going to read between the lines here, having done some yoga and I used to own a gym and blah, blah, blah. I'm guessing she's saying if you're lazy about these positions and you don't give it very much effort and you scoot through, right? Then that's kind of the way you'll do everything in life. But if you take it seriously and aim for perfection, you aim for the bullseye. Doesn't matter if you hit the bullseye every time, you should at least aim at it, right?
Right.
And that's going to show up in the rest of your life, or that becomes habitual.
Right. And, this looks at, our lack of completion, where we go in to do something. I know that this is sometimes one of the patterns in my own life. It's like, I've got this really great movement to 90%, and then I kind of fall off. And then I start to see that in my other things in my life. It's like, I'll have a cleaning thing that I'm doing in the house, and I'll get everything just really together. And then there's this piece that I look at and I go, yeah, I'm just going to leave that. I'm not going to finish that. Or, a project around the house. I remember my first wife had a joke because I had built this really great, nice house near the beach in Carlsbad, and gone through and had a lot of detail, but the laundry room never got the baseboard put in.
Right.
And that was an analogy for her. It's like, yeah, you didn't finish the baseboard.
Yeah, the finish work. I was an electrician, and that was kind of the standard, is nobody did the finish work, right?
Right. So, that would be something that would be repetitive in my world that, I still play with today. And it's like, yeah, everything in here, even to some of the things that you and I do and our practices with this. So we start to look at that, and when we can see that pattern, we can go back in to go, okay, I'm going to stretch here. I'm going to do this. So the opposite of that piece might be perfectionism. Your perfectionism, that place where it's never good enough for you.
Right.
And because it's never good enough for you, you don't engage in the completion of it. You don't set the class forward or the project forward. It's like you're always planning and trying to get it just dialed in perfect before you launch it into the public. And I have friends that struggle with that one. Another one of these patterns is caretaking others. Taking care of other people's stuff, trying to fix that for them, trying to take care of them to the place where you don't take care of yourself, where that is a deflection of being outwards. And this is a place where a lot of people get caught up in the conflict of giving up themselves to somebody else and getting taken advantage where there's no reciprocity, there's no mutuality in the relationship, and there starts to become this patterning of resentment and manipulation. So that's another place where these fractal patterns start to show up.
Right. Perfectionism is an interesting one because I believe that that's been a part of my life for a long time, right? Sort of the paralyzation that comes from don't do anything until it's perfect.
Right.
Whoops, I kicked my laptop, sorry. But I had taken some training in 2005 from someone that taught something called the 80% rule. And he kind of used Microsoft as an example. And I'm sure there's things Microsoft, people don't want to emulate or whatever, but he called it the 80% rule and said, when anything is 80% ready, your book or your seminar or your court documents or whatever, when it's 80% ready, put it out there. Right. And it gets it in motion, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens is you get feedback or you have an outcome and you go, oh, it wasn't perfect. Okay, whatever. And then you fix 80% of the 20 that's missing and you're up to 96. Yeah. And so he used Microsoft as an example in that they kind of release their software and then have the people tell them where the bugs are, right?
I think it's a great rule if you follow up on it.
And what it does is, they teach us the same thing in entrepreneurialism is like no one does anything as well as you do. And so hiring people is almost impossible for an entrepreneur. Like they're not going to do it the same as I do. Mm-hmm. And another mentor of mine who was really good in business basically taught like, no, they'll never do it as well as you do. But the result they get is worth the time freedom that you get by hiring them to do that or whatever it is. So like you can't, that's one of the belief systems that we kind of need to let go of is you actually can't have perfect. We can kind of see it, right? I mean, it's almost like the horizon. You can always see the horizon, but you can't get to it. You aim at it.
Yeah. It's always just beyond your reach.
Yeah. And learning to be satisfied with less than perfect is a pretty important pill, to kind of take in life. And I would think, I mean, look at my situation or anybody who's listening to this, these episodes, like I would change so much about what I did in the past and none of it was perfect and the court systems and all this kind of stuff. But at each moment we're doing the best we can and kind of the best you can do is never going to be perfect. So that one particularly for me speaks out, Now fixing is next on our list. What's that all about?
So fixing other people's stuff, trying to get in and
savior complex or what?
Right. It's like, getting in and, seeing where their lack of capacity is or trying to fix it for them. And I always look at that piece as, again, a deflection of what we're trying to accomplish or what we need to accomplish by looking at ourselves. So this fixing piece, creates resentment because people feel that you don't feel that they're capable or able to do it. And then you're taking away from them the ability to learn, that place where that struggle is that crucible under which we gain resiliency and knowledge and ability, right?
Yeah. And at 47, I'm very, very different than even 44, but way different than my 20s. And part of my beliefs today, you can tell me your thoughts, are anything you bring to another human being that they didn't ask you for, didn't ask for your opinion, all they're hearing, no matter what words you use, all they're hearing is you shouldn't be the way you are, you're wrong, you're bad, something, and they shut down. Mm-hmm. And I've shared this analogy probably before, but when I owned a gym, you could not walk up to somebody and say, you're not doing that the right way. You're lifting improperly. You couldn't, right? You could become a trainer. You could become buff yourself. So if somebody would reach out and say, I want some training sessions, what is your advice? Then you could give advice. If they'd reach out and say, your body's amazing, you look like a stud, can you tell me how you got those pecs? Now you're in, right? You and I have talked about this with parenting, you may be able to approach someone to say, you're just kicking butt. You look amazing. I've been studying this for 20 years. Are you open to any feedback?
Right.
Any little tweaks? You can ask to be invited in, sort of knock on the door. But man, opening somebody's front door and screaming about how they should do their dishes or whatever, it's just not, you're not welcome.
Right.
Fixing, I mean, when I hear the word fixing or caretaking, I hear control.
Right. Right. We're trying to get somebody to do something that they're either not aware of or they don't want to do or they're not interested in finding out yet. And the inquiry of are you interested for some feedback in this is even almost intrusive. I mean, there's a very fine line of, yeah, this is working, and are you interested in a little refinement?
It's like interruption marketing in the business world. They call it interruption marketing, right? Do you really want the commercial to interrupt the show? No. Do you want to look at the billboard or have the spam? You don't. But that's almost a necessary element of society for people to get help, is the little mildly intrusive like offer, and then they either ignore it or go, hey, it's the right timing for me. I found myself in that ad, right?
Yep.
So I would say either do nothing or ask to be invited in, knock on the door. Don't barge in and be telling people what they should and shouldn't do and try to fix them. I mean, it's the God's business, others' business, my business model, right? Anytime you get into other people's business and God's business, you start to have anxiety and stress in your life, because you're not supposed to be there.
Yeah. Just beyond. So the other piece is, deflecting, not taking responsibility. This is the place where people get into the patterning of being a victim. It's not my fault. I didn't do it.
I can't relate at all.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend that I ride my horse with a couple of weeks ago, and he was down with his family in Mexico. They were on a surf trip, and he and his stepson had gotten taken the family to stop at a taco shop to get some food before they went out to the wine country to do some wine tasting and lunch with the family. And the family didn't really want to go, but their guys were just starved because they just came out of a surf session. So they got out of the car, they locked the car, and they went to get tacos. And they came back, and one of the windows had been smashed in, and the phones were missing. The girls' phones were missing. And the girls blamed Dad and the stepbrother for stopping to get tacos when they had left their phones out on the seat and on the console so people could see it. So there was this place of, this deflection of, oh, and he was really good about it. He said, yeah, okay. He didn't go back into the blaming them for putting the phones up on the console, but, it was apparent that what had happened was clearly that the phones were left exposed, because if they had been, somebody wouldn't have seen them, they wouldn't have broken them. But that place of not taking responsibility, it's your fault. It's your attorney's fault. It's the other parent's fault. It's the next door neighbor's fault. It's your best friend's fault. But, this place of not going, yeah, I created that moment. That's my deal. I have to take responsibility for it. And this is a strong pattern when we look at conflict. It creates conflict. It's like, you're over there and you're not feeding the child and they're struggling with their allergies or whatever it is. And then, it's like they're not taking responsibility for their own side of it. They're deflecting. So that's one of the pieces.
Got it. How dare you eat while I put my valuables out in a country known for theft? It is your stomach that's the problem.
Yeah, no, it cracked me up because
that is pretty funny.
Very well.
Yeah.
It's like it was so indicative of the patterning there.
Patterns. Nice.
Avoidance. Avoidance is another one. The place where we are conflict avoidant. Or
I don't want to talk about this one.
Right. I absolutely don't want to talk about it either. Let's move on to the next piece. But that avoidance of not setting boundaries because it feels like it's going to create conflict, and putting our head in the sand and not really looking around at what's taking place, because if I don't look at it, I don't see it, I don't have to experience it, and my system doesn't get ignited, of course, until I take my head out of the sand.
I would think a huge majority of listeners could have divorced or separated years or not decades before without this one.
Right.
Like, it just doesn't sound pleasant. I would rather dive into hope with no data behind it. You know what I mean? Like hope with no reason, right? Like I hope a paycheck is coming because I know I did the work and it's coming. That's hope with a reason.
Yeah, and I'm not going to invoice it or follow up on it, or I'm going to invoice it, but I'm not going to follow up on the invoice when it's 30, 60, 90 days late because it doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good. Exactly. I mean, I know that's true for me. I know it's true for my girlfriend, several other people I've talked to. Like we really could have left 5, 8, 10 years earlier. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, the first time somebody breaks a boundary and you say, I have a boundary, please don't do that. And they, whether verbally or through actions, say, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm so pro separation and pro divorce just earlier. And the same thing, I keep using business analogies. They teach us hire slowly and fire quickly. And the people that teach that are basically like, there's no one they've met in 30 years that regrets firing an employee, but there's almost every entrepreneur they know regrets keeping one too long.
Right. And I think, in relationship, we have to really pay attention to this one because, again, the fractal nature of this, and we've talked about it before, this inside out look at what it is that we are reflecting or being reflected from the other person is valuable feedback, and the interaction between people and how that interaction takes place is indicative of how that relationship is going to continue. So I set a boundary and somebody breaks it. Okay, where in the spectrum is that boundary? But what I think is an important conversation in this is, what are the deal breakers?
Exactly.
What are the boundaries in this that are deal breakers? I got a boundary. I want you to, make sure that when you're done with the dishes that you put them in the dishwasher, and rather than leave them out so I don't look at them in the morning. And that happens from time to time where it doesn't get done. That's not a deal breaker. The deal breaker is you're having an emotional affair with somebody at work, or, you've got this pattern that's going on. And if we can't make a correction here, I'm out.
Yeah.
And let's have a conversation about that, that deal breaker, and not avoid it because it's uncomfortable.
Sure. Yeah.
So the next one's procrastination. Baseboard.
Yeah, right. Like temporary avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
Just snooze.
Or long-term avoidance.
Snooze.
And this is
well, I've done long-term avoidance with the snooze button.
Yeah. Right.
12. I think after a while the snooze button stops working, at least on the old clocks.
I don't want to get up today. I just don't want to do it. So the reflection inside out, how do your internal parts reflect your outside world? This is an amazing one, and we're going to do a whole session with this really soon around, looking at this reflection of what's taking place. As I play more and more with the internal family systems, and I look at this, I can see these internal parts that have arisen in my being. And as I look at them and as I look at how they work together, I can see a reflection of my family of origin. Those pieces are all in there and they're all having some of the same conversations. It's pretty wild.
Yep.
And the reflection outward of how I did things with my family as I was in that and they were growing up, and how some of that continues with my current relationships. So to come into that fractal awareness of this repetitive nature, and then to come back in and go, okay, let's look at this and see how we can start to tweak that and change that patterning. But we're going to have a whole podcast on that pretty soon here. I just have to grab the parts together so we can have that conversation.
Perfect. Nice.
And then, the beliefs and how they express. Again, this is a fractal piece. These are my beliefs. And they continue to express in different areas with different people as to how I want things to manifest, or I want people to understand something that I believe, and I'm not willing to move off of that belief. So I keep repeating that in my world. So, linking these patterns to um, my relationships.
Yeah.
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 Looking
There's,
at, go ahead.
have you heard that statement? This is not that.
Right.
Have you heard that before? I heard it on a relationship training from Tony Robbins. Um, something about us when we see something that reminds us of something from the past, even if it's a completely different human being, we go, "Oh my gosh, this is that. This is that again." Right?
Yep.
So somebody raises their voice and hits you, and the next person raises their voice, you're like, "They're going to hit me."
Right.
But this is not that, right? This is totally, and it's such a healing, helpful sentence.
Mhm. It's a healing sentence, and there's also, I think, Charlie, a little more exploration to that. This is not that. And I think sometimes it's a place where I've certainly gotten hung up in it, and you have too, where I've been in a relationship, and I've really worked at down regulating the affect of really not coming out strong, because I know that that coming out strong has that, oh, this is that conversation with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
So that talks to their history and their patterning. And there's this idea, and I think we have to explore that one a lot as well, that when we get big, we get loud, we get up in somebody's grill, there is a threat in the air
Yeah.
of the next piece. And it's an intimidation, it is a manipulation of somebody because we've got that type of energy and we can move them. And the idea that this isn't that can actually be this is that, because the nervous system takes it in similarly.
Right. This isn't that, but this does the same things inside of me as that does.
Right, right. And, being able to really understand that with somebody, my second wife was really able to show me that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, okay, you're really having an overreaction. And no, it wasn't an overreaction. It was the reaction that she was having based on her history. And that place where I got big, it was overbearing and pushing on, which is, yeah, that's something that we don't want to do. And this, again, this is a fractal movement. If we've got that patterning in our system, we're going to do it over and over and over again. And it's going to come sneaking in. So again,
Yeah.
and when I make a point to downregulate that piece, to talk more softly, to be more engaged, to be more open for somebody else to come in and have conversation, then it changes all of that pattern.
Right. Yep.
And last but not least, this piece of history and how it circles. These patterns, and we keep talking about this, these patterns keep coming around and coming around and coming around. And we can see it over time. If we're old enough, if we've been on the planet long enough, we can see it in our own circle. But what I've tried to do is to look at the different individuals in my family of origin, but in my extended family, and my aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews and cousins, and to see the same patterning that slips in with some of the same DNA. Obviously there's a diffusion of that because of the DNA expressing with new elements, but some of the patterns just seem to be so familiar around avoidance, around perfectionism, around addiction, around these
Yeah.
other components. And as they express it, so much of this is out there in humanity anyway.
Yeah.
And that, again, is part of the fractal nature of being able to look at the outside world and see how these pieces are expressing our own experience as well.
Yep. Yep.
So again, how you do anything is how you do everything. And what I'm really wanting people to start to do is make that exploration into your own world and see just how these patterns unfold for you. I think you'll find them fascinating. I think you'll find them enlightening. And I think you'll find them if you engage in the process, life changing.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like perfect practice makes perfect. Like if you practice a really bad golf swing over and over and over again, it's not, practice doesn't make perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect practice makes perfect. So you want to be, if there's areas of your life you want to be better at, focus on each area of your life, right? How should this be done? If there is a should, or at least there's just the way that you want it to be done, finishing the dishes, making your bed, whatever it might be, and start with those little things. And again, he who's faithful with little will be given much. Who knows if that's got spiritual realities behind it, but it's probably an accurate statement, right? Like take the pieces that you do have, the responsibilities that you do have, and do a great job on those, and be ready for other ones, or do well on the small things and apply that to the big things.
Yeah, a phrase just occurred to me while we were talking about this, because we talked about the horizon and everything. The phrase that I kind of want to leave in this is thrive for the threshold.
Thrive for the threshold. Good. Yeah. It helps to see sort of, to point towards something and see an end that you're going after. Yeah.
And be willing to watch it change.
Yep. Well, awesome. Does that wrap this one up?
That wraps it up, Charlie. Thank you.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you everybody for listening to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. Please do tell your friends.